Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics we are going to discuss. Today's newspaper is quite interesting. Even though we have few articles, the articles are very interesting and very important for the exam. There are two columns relevant for both prelims and mains, and they require a detailed analysis. And we have four small articles which could be more important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all of them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's get started by looking at this important column from page number 8, which is related to Indian economy. The writer of the column focuses upon the regional divide that has come up in India as a result of unequal economic growth. This is the focus of the article. The writer, who is a former professor at the JNU, brings his expertise into this article and analyzes the economic disparity that is present in the country. When you look at different regions, different states in the country, you clearly see a different level of development from north to south to west to east. And the writer is trying to understand and explain why we are witnessing such regional disparity. The context in which this article has been brought out is a report that was recently published by the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council is a very important advisory body that acts like a think tank to the Prime Minister's office, particularly on economic matters. So this council recently published a report titled Relative Economic Performance of Indian States, which provides the analysis of the economic performance of Indian states from 1960 till now. So it contains research data of the last 6 decades and helps us understand at what point did Indian states started diverging from each other with regard to their development indicators. There are some states which are contributing more to the national economy as compared to the other. There are few states which have a higher per capita income, which is much higher than even the national average. There are some states which have better development indicators from health to education to governance and infrastructure, whereas there are other states which are still backward, dealing with significant governance challenges and unable to attract investments. So it is this important issue that is being explored in this article. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and understand why these regional disparities are present. And if we don't address these issues, how could this threaten federalism and the unity of the nation? That is what we need to study and understand from this important column. So please concentrate on this map, which I have added over here, because I would like to deviate from the article as well and go beyond the article and provide some inputs which can be useful for this particular discussion. This map clearly illustrates the developmental divide present in the country. If you look at the coastal states of India, particularly the coastal states located in the south and in the west, they have clearly registered better development, especially in the last 3 to 4 decades, especially after 1991, after India introduced the LPG reforms, also called the New Economic Policy, that brought out liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The southern states and the western states, they have capitalized on the opportunities, creating better opportunities for themselves, driving growth and development. Today, these are the states which are driving India's growth primarily, contributing to a large share of the country's GDP. And they also register very high per capita income, which is much higher than the national average. They also have better human development indicators from standard of living to health and education. So be it Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and even Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, these southern and western states of India, they have capitalized on the advantage of being coastal states. Because in a globalized world, having direct access to the sea and having access to strategic ports is a blessing, because this helps in engaging with global trade, in connecting with the global shipping channels, to drive imports and exports and connect them with the industries, with agriculture as well, with manufacturing and services, and thus drive growth and development opportunities. So this is a natural geographical advantage. But other than this, the southern and western states have done better when it comes to governance, when it comes to maintaining rule of law, when it comes to providing ease of doing business. So they've been able to address basic challenges like healthcare, education, provided decent infrastructure. That is what attracted investments. Because eventually investments are the driver of growth, be it public investments coming from the government or private sector investments. The southern and western states in coastal areas have done relatively better compared to the other states in the country, as they have been able to attract more investments because of their better governance, because of better rule of law, ease of doing business, and better indicators of health and education. These have been the primary contributors, which has allowed these states to develop better by attracting more investments. Now, if you look at the other side of India, it represents a stark contrast. You look at the eastern parts of India, northern parts of India as well, except for Delhi, Haryana, parts of Punjab. If you exclude those areas of Delhi, Haryana, parts of Punjab, the rest of North India and Eastern India and most of Northeast India as well, they haven't seen the same level of development. See, this is not about blaming these states. This is about figuring out why these states have not been able to perform as the southern and western states of India. That is exactly what the writer is looking at. So now can you tell me how the divide in especially Eastern India, central parts of India, contributed to a major security threat? Can you tell me in the comments? Because this regional disparity, which has persisted from several decades, has directly contributed to a persistent security problem that we are dealing with. So what is that security problem I'm referring to? Very good, Roger. Roger has correctly pointed out the challenge posed by Naxalism. If you understand the rise of Naxalism in 1960s, 1970s, you will get to know that the developmental problems was at the root of the rise of this left-wing extremist ideology. The lack of development, the poor governance, and the sense of injustice that prevailed in central eastern parts of India is what primarily triggered the Naxal movement, which eventually became a major security threat for India and even today remains a major security challenge for India. So this clearly highlights the linkages between lack of development and the rise of extremism. How when regional disparities are present, poor governance is present, this could create a fertile ground for extremist elements, radical forces that could threaten the integrity and unity of the nation. That is exactly what the writer is pointing out. If such disparities persist, it will not only weaken federalism because it has increased the differences between the states, it could also create a ground for extremist elements that could weaken the unity of the nation. So what you need to learn is that regional disparities, if they are not addressed, if they are allowed to persist, it will inevitably weaken federalism, which is a basic structure of the Indian Constitution, as states will start competing and fighting against each other, complaining about each other. It weakens the spirit of federalism, and it could create a fertile ground for extremist radical forces, which could even threaten the unity and integrity of the nation. So let me know, do you agree with this assessment of the writer? The writer is, according to me, correctly pointing out that if regional disparities are not addressed, if we don't create similar opportunities for the eastern and northern states of India, and as well as the northeast region of India, this will widen the differences even further, creating a threat for federalism and the unity of the nation. So let me know what you think in the comments. Now, I would like to take some of the points from the article and further illustrate this point that the writer is trying to make. The writer takes the example of Maharashtra to help us understand the extent of disparity present, the kind of regional divide which is present in our country. The writer takes the example of Maharashtra. Maharashtra contributes the maximum to the nation's economy. It is considered as the largest contributor to the country's GDP. This is usually followed by Tamil Nadu. Now, if you look at Maharashtra, there is a divide within the state of Maharashtra. Because when I say that Maharashtra is the highest contributor to the nation's economy, one might presume that the entire state of Maharashtra is performing equally. One might presume that the entire state of Maharashtra is well developed. But that is not the case. The reality is that even within a state, even within a developed state, there are differences present from region to region. You look at the Mumbai-Pune belt. That happens to be the most developed belt in Maharashtra, the most industrial, given its proximity to the coast. And Mumbai being the financial hub of the country, it has attracted investments, it has grown at a rapid pace. And today, the ultra-rich of Mumbai, they are responsible for the highest direct taxes coming from this region. Compared to any other part of the country, the Mumbai region alone contributes the highest volume of direct taxes to the government. But look at the other side of Maharashtra. Look at the Amravati belt, the Vidarbha region, which is arid to semi-arid, which suffers from agrarian problems, rural distress. Farmer suicide rate is extremely high due to extreme poverty, given that crops keep failing repeatedly due to the arid nature of the region and repeated droughts and heat waves. You see extreme distress, economic distress present in the rural belt of the Vidarbha region. In fact, the very same Vidarbha Amravati belt is a hub of Naxal activity, and this is not a coincidence. The presence of Naxals in the Vidarbha belt is a direct result of the agrarian distress, the farmer distress present in the region. Now forget the state. Even within the city of Mumbai, you find a lot of disparities. If you have ever been to Mumbai, on one side you will see the swanky skyscrapers, the modern city where the ultra-rich are present. And right next to it, you will see some of the largest slums in the world, the Dharavi slum, for example, where people are living under extremely harsh conditions. So even inside a city, there are such differences present. And having such a division, a socio-economic division, is never good for the larger interests of the nation. It weakens the unity of the nation as it sets the people apart, and it could easily breed resentment as well. And the writer makes a very valid point here that if we do not address these disparities, we will see an impact on federalism and the unity of the nation. Now, what is important is that we should understand what kind of regional differences are seen and why did these regional differences occur. Now, for example, if Tamil Nadu, Karnataka can develop and create job opportunities, why couldn't Bihar do that? Why couldn't Jharkhand or Odisha do that? Odisha, by the way, is a coastal state and still is considered as a relatively backward state. So what really happened in different parts of India? That is what we need to understand. So one thing is very clear. The Economic Advisory Council's report makes it very clear that western southern states of India, the coastal states especially, have done relatively better, far better than the eastern and northern states of India. Now, we know that this could weaken federalism and the unity of the nation, but let's see what factors have contributed to this and what could be the consequences. Recently, the chief ministers of southern states, they held a conference in Kerala. The southern states in particular got together and they have raised an issue with the center, which is a persisting issue from some years. The southern states in particular are alleging that they're not getting a fair share of the resources from the center. The center which is responsible for devolving the funds. raised through tax collection, which is based on Finance Commission recommendations. In this regard, the states in the south, they feel that they are contributing more to the nation's economy. They're contributing more revenue to the tax pool, which is collected by the center. But when it comes to distribution, since it is based primarily on the population metric, southern states receive a lesser share compared to the other more populous states, which haven't done enough with regard to development. So southern states have been demanding a fair devolution of funds. And this has even led to extreme suggestions by some leaders that southern states should also increase their population. Because in southern India, most states have already hit the total fertility rate, and fertility rates have been dropping as well. So given that devolution of funds depends on the population of a state, which is one of the prime metrics, southern states are now raising this voice against the unfair devolution. And this has brought up a debate between North versus South. This has even acquired a very ugly tone, which projects North Indians versus South Indians, which shouldn't be the case. Given the larger interests of the country, we should not be looking at this as a North versus South issue, but that is how eventually it will get politicized as. If these divides and differences persist, that is how these issues will get politicized by our politicians and political parties. Instead of we getting divided on regional lines, we should be putting our brains together, working together to ensure that we provide equitable development across regions. But rather, it is becoming a North versus South debate, which shouldn't have been the case, which is very unfortunate. So you are already seeing real example, a live example of how the divide could weaken the integrity of the nation and even threaten federalism. Now, if you look at the reasons for the divide, most of the answers can be found in the new economic policy of 1991. The new economic policy, which brought in the LPG reforms, primarily benefited the southern and western states. See, because the southern and western states, they already had basic governance, decent governance. They were able to create the right conditions to attract investments with regard to education, with regard to health, and even governance. These metrics were relatively better in these states. Because this is exactly what investors will look for. Right? They will look for better infrastructure, better governance, ease of doing business. They would need the required talented, skilled manpower, which was readily available in some of these states. This is what drove the private investors. Because after 1991, the government largely took a backseat when it came to investments. Under the new economic policy, the idea was that government would act more like a catalyst. The government would be an enabler, whereas it would allow the market forces to play a primary role. So the government started focusing more on the hinterland, the rural areas, underdeveloped areas. Because see, generally, private investments are driven by the profit motive, right? That's how private business works. There's nothing wrong with that. So private investments will get concentrated in developed areas. Since they are looking for a large, ready market, which they can immediately capitalize and reap profits, they will primarily invest in those cities, in those states and regions, which are already developed relatively. So in 1990s, if you look at the scenario back then, it was the southern and western states which stood out from the rest of the country, given that they had slightly better governance, slightly better infrastructure than other states, and definitely better healthcare and education. So this automatically attracted a flood of private investments, including foreign investment, that contributed to the rise of these states, the industrialization of the southern and western states of India. Now, if you look at the efforts of the government post-90s, the government was mainly focusing on the underdeveloped regions, because private investors will not invest in forested areas, tribal belt, or in agrarian areas. So to bring development in these areas, the government started focusing on those regions. The government would try to break into those regions to create those opportunities so that later private sector can be attracted. The government even tried to give incentives through tax breaks and subsidies and financial incentives to attract private investments into the backward, untouched, underdeveloped areas as well. But since market forces are driven by the profit motive, most private investments got crowded into the major cities and the developed states that existed. So this, according to the writer, was unfair to the other states which were relatively backward. From Bihar to UP to Jharkhand to Odisha, many of these states, including Rajasthan, they were left behind, according to the writer. Now, the point is, if private investments have been clogged in the coastal belt, in urban cities, and in the major developed states, what do we do about the other regions? Because see, it's unfair to blame the southern and western states as well. The reason why they were able to attract investments is because they had done better with regard to governance, education, and rule of law, which wasn't present in the other states. That is the prime reason why private investments flocked to these parts of the country, as they expected more stability. Because if you look at that period, states like Punjab were ravaged by insurgency. Northeast India was hit by insurgency. Central Eastern India was affected by insurgency. Corruption was very rampant in states like UP and Bihar, and there was a weakness in healthcare, education, and in infrastructure in the northern and eastern states. So credit should be given to the southern and western states as well. But at the same time, as a nation, we should focus more on equitable, inclusive development to ensure all the regions develop equitably. So since private investments, majority of it has been crowded into the richer states, now the point is, how do we address the disparity? Because this disparity continues to grow. Data from the Economic Advisory Council's report clearly shows that the disparity is still increasing. There are some states which are falling behind, whereas the other states are performing better and better, which is increasing the division in the country. So if you look at some states like West Bengal and Kerala, even though they were located in very good locations, they weren't also able to attract the same level of investment like their neighboring states. You take Kerala, for example. Kerala couldn't attract the same level of investment like Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. The prime reason would be the nature of politics, the strong left movements, and the strong labor and trade unions, which deterred the private investors. Same goes for West Bengal. Even though they both enjoyed the benefit of a large coastline with major ports, they never saw the same level of investments like Maharashtra, Gujarat, or even Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. If you look at North, East, and other parts of India which were affected by insurgency, especially the border states, of course, they would not be preferred by the investors due to the lack of stability. The lack of security would put off the investors. So there were many factors across different parts of India which deterred private investments. From security situation to poor governance to lack of opportunities, lack of resources, and complex politics. This is what affected some of these states which could not attract the same level of investments when compared to the other states which did better. So now the writer has a simple solution for this challenge. The writer is suggesting that definitely the persistence of these differences is a threat to federalism and unity. So what we should do is to bridge the gap, bridge that divide. And in order to bridge that divide, we need to focus on unorganized sector. I think this is a very valid argument that the writer is making, because generally government policies focus more on the organized sector. In fact, this is one of the reasons why southern and western states did much better compared to the northern and eastern states. Because by 1990s, these states already had a thriving organized industry. Generally, government policies are inclined to streamline all the unorganized industries into organized sector. But this approach could be counterproductive, because in some states like Bihar, for example, Odisha, for example, you still have a large unorganized sector which has not been tapped, which has not been addressed. So what the writer is suggesting is a very radical approach. The writer is suggesting a bottom-up approach to give more preference to some of the backward states and give priority for unorganized sectors and industries, so that it increases the per capita income in some of the backward states, which increases the demand And as demand goes up, it will automatically bring in investments. The writer is not saying that the southern and western states should be discriminated. No. The writer is saying anyway, southern and western states are doing well. They definitely have better governance, better infrastructure, and still they have great growth opportunities. So let them continue to grow. They will not be pulled back. But the backward states deserve more priority, especially with regard to their unorganized sector, as they have a large section of their population still in the unorganized industry. If the government prioritizes the unorganized sector, this could increase per capita income. This will drive demand and it will attract private investments. So that is one of the key suggestions that the writer is providing. So along with focus on socio-economic development and better welfare schemes, there has to be priority given to promote the unorganized industry as well, particularly in the backward states, in the relatively backward states. Another important observation the writer makes is the issue created by migration. Because obviously when such disparities come up from state to state, region to region, people will start migrating. People who are not finding opportunities in their native region, they will migrate to other areas, to cities and other richer developed states to find better opportunities. So that is what led to a massive migration of workers from northern and eastern parts of India towards southern and western parts of India, be it for job opportunities or education or investment opportunities. We saw a big migration, not just of people, even the savings, the household savings from these states migrated to southern and western states. For example, let's say an engineer from UP finds a IT job in Bengaluru. So after finding a job in Bengaluru, he would shift with his family as well, sell off the property in UP and purchase a new property in Bengaluru. So household savings would also shift to these richer states, bringing even more funds while stripping off the savings in the home state. But however, I don't entirely agree with the argument the writer is making here, because when migration happens, there would be remittances sent back by those who migrate. The migrant workers will send money back as well to their families. You need to take that into account as well. Those who are earning in Mumbai, Hyderabad, Chennai or Bengaluru, they would be sending money back to their families in UP, Bihar and Odisha, right? Of course, that hasn't been accounted here by the writer in the column. But other than that, the writer does have a point that migration led to the movement of not just people, but even household savings from the less developed states to the more developed states. So that is why the writer is urging the central government and the state governments to focus on unorganized sector in the backward states. This is a bottom-up approach. Let the developed states continue to grow. Let them attract all the investments. But for the time being, the center and the states, especially the concerned states, they should focus on tackling corruption, improving governance, providing better infrastructure, providing better healthcare and education, and streamline the unorganized sector. Let unorganized sector grow even further without a forced attempt to make it an organized sector. So as per capita income grows in the unorganized sector, people will have more spending power in states like Jharkhand, Bihar, Rajasthan, etc. So as the per capita income goes up, the demand will increase. That will bring in private investments. This is one of the suggestions that the writer is providing. Now see, these are very debatable topics. You need not entirely agree with what the writer is telling us. That's why I try to provide a counter argument as well. Now you let me know what you think. If you have any other suggestions, any other inputs on how we can bridge the regional disparity, do let me know. And this question will help you to develop those opinions. The persisting differentials in the economic performance of different states are threatening federalism. Discuss. So it's a very broad question, right? So you can start your answer with a good introduction to bring out the disparities present in India. Maybe you can draw a rough map, right? If you're comfortable with it, you can draw a rough map of India and roughly depict the differences that exist between southern western India and north and eastern India. Or in a small paragraph, right? If you don't want to draw a map, in one small paragraph, you can bring out those disparities, point out how a different level of growth, a different level of per capita income is seen in different states. And right there, you have to express your view. When you're ending the introduction, point out that the disparities, if they persist, it could be a threat to federalism and unity of the nation. So that you are clearly expressing your opinion about the topic at the very beginning of your answer. Then in the body, this is where you provide all the details. Whatever stand you have taken, whatever opinion you have expressed in the introduction, you need to substantiate that in the body by adding the details. This is where the muscle has to be provided to your argument. So bring in the facts, the data that we discussed. You can use reports which is mentioned in this article, for example, and try to quote some data to bring out the disparities that exist, why the disparities were created, how the LPG reforms could have possibly contributed, and finally, what could be the way forward, what could be the solution. So as you come to the conclusion of your answer, you need to again point out that disparities cannot be allowed to persist. You can even link the lack of development with rise of extremism. And you can even give example of the North-South divide which has emerged, right? So that shows a threat to federalism and unity of the nation. And hence we need to address those disparities by focusing on unorganized sector and the backward regions to bridge the gap, to bridge the divide. So this would make for a well-structured, a complete answer, well-rounded answer. So let's see how many of you can write a good answer for this question. Please post that in the comment section as well. And if you have any doubts, any questions, kindly let me know. Please post that in the comments. I'll try to pick up some questions. Now let's look at another interesting article on page number 9 related to the situation in Myanmar. As you all know, Myanmar is going through a devastating civil war since 2021. It's been more than 3 years since the country descended into a civil war. Now, the reason why this topic is in news is because recently the ASEAN, which is a regional group of Southeast Asian countries, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it held its 44th summit at Laos. And Myanmar, being a Southeast Asian country, it is obviously a member of ASEAN group. And the situation in Myanmar came up for discussion at the 44th ASEAN Summit in Laos. India, of course, was also a participant because we have dialogue partner status with ASEAN. India is one of the dialogue partners of ASEAN. We also hold a parallel India-ASEAN Summit. Every year there is a parallel India-ASEAN Summit, which is held immediately after the ASEAN Summit. This is part of our Look East, Act East policy. Under the Look East, Act East policy, India has been prioritizing the Southeast Asian region over the last 3 decades. So, India-ASEAN have a regular summit level meeting from 2002 under the Look East policy, which was started in 1991 by P.V. Narasimha Rao. We have been holding regular interaction every year. A leader summit is held. And now the policy has been upgraded by the Modi government through the Act East policy. So India has been more proactive towards Southeast East Asia region, and engagement with ASEAN and countries like Myanmar they are absolutely critical for our Act East approach. Given that India faces a lot of challenges in the Southeast East Asia region and in the Indo-Pacific region, it's important for India to step up its ties with these countries and groupings and ensure that there is stability as well, especially since Myanmar is a neighboring country of India. We share a long border with the country. It's very crucial for India to ensure that we work with these like-minded countries, the regional powers, and stabilize the situation in Myanmar. So that is the focus of this article. So first, let's quickly understand what happened in Myanmar. See, Myanmar has suffered from decades of military rule since 1960s. Democracy has been wiped out in the country by the military junta. Myanmar's military, the Tatmadaw, has always ensured that democracy doesn't thrive in the country. It has kept authoritarian control. In the 1980s, it crushed the pro-democracy movement as well with brutal force. It not only killed civilian protesters, but it also placed pro-democracy leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest for years together. So Myanmar is not new to violating democratic rights and human rights. But following Western pressure after decades of Western economic sanctions, finally Myanmar had shown a change from 2010 to 2020. After decades of military rule and after decades of crushing pro-democracy movement, finally Myanmar showed some change from 2010 to 2020. In 2010, there was a partial reform towards democracy, where partially fair elections were introduced. And by 2015, Myanmar transitioned into a democracy and the military had stepped aside. As expected, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, National League for Democracy, won the election in 2015 and formed a democratic government for 5 years. But in 2020, when the next round of elections were held, the NLD was again expected to win the elections. Given the popularity of the party, as it has been leading the pro-democracy struggle for many decades, and also given the popularity of its leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, who is a Nobel laureate, who has won the Nobel Peace Prize, the people of Myanmar were clearly favoring the same party again. And this rising popularity of democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi and the party, threatened the military generals. The Tatmadaw felt threatened by the growing popularity of democracy and Aung San Suu Kyi, and they cancelled the election results. They nullified the election results without any valid basis. In early 2021, they alleged that electoral fraud had been committed. They raised allegations of electoral manipulation without any evidence, and they cancelled the results and toppled the elected government and declared a state of emergency. So since 2021, Myanmar has been back under military rule. So as soon as the military junta carried out this coup, immediately the pro-democracy forces and other ethnic armed organizations, they rebelled against the military dictatorship. All the pro-democracy parties and forces united to form the People's Defense Force and a national unity government. They started resisting the imposition of the emergency. Myanmar, which is a deeply ethnic society, just like Northeast India, it has been witnessing several armed ethnic insurgencies by different ethnic groups, like the Kachins, the Rohingyas, the Chins. There are several such communities, the Shan community, which has been waging an insurgent war against Myanmar's military rule for many, many years. So all the ethnic armed organizations united with the pro-democracy forces, and they launched a joint assault against the military dictatorship. Initially, the military junta tried to crush the movement by using brutal force, and it committed brutal atrocities. It killed several civilians, and it even used massive force, including airstrikes, and disproportionate military force was used, where many civilians were killed, triggering a humanitarian tragedy in the country. Millions of people were displaced, including young children. A lot of refugees flowed into India as well, as India shares a long border, and some of the ethnic communities are connected, like the Mizos of Mizoram are connected with the Chin community of Myanmar. The Kukis of Manipur are connected with the Zomi community in Myanmar. Nagas are also connected on both sides. There are subgroups of Nagas in Myanmar as well. So naturally, there was a spillover effect. A lot of refugees who were being targeted with the military, they fled across the border into India, creating a refugee burden in the border states. And it has allegedly even added to the security problems in some of the northeastern states. So this is how the situation in Myanmar deteriorated. But over the last 2 years, something remarkable has been happening. Initially, from 2021 to 2023, in the initial phase of the civil war, it was primarily the military junta which was dominant, which was even using brutal force to crush the rebellion by targeting the ethnic armed groups and as well as the pro-democracy forces. But over the last 1.5 years, we have seen something remarkable. There has been a dramatic turnaround in the conflict. These pro-democracy and ethnic armed groups, they have been able to capture significant territory and they have delivered significant losses to the military regime. And for the first time, possibly in the history of Myanmar, it appears that the rebel groups might have an edge and the military appears to be on the back foot. In fact, many experts even predict that in another few months, we might even see a complete collapse of the military regime and the state of Myanmar. And possibly, the country could be taken over by the ethnic armed groups and the pro-democracy forces. So that is the current situation in Myanmar. The last 12 to 15 months, it has seen a complete turnaround where the rebel groups have made big advances. In fact, few ethnic armed groups formed an alliance as well, called the Three Brotherhood Alliance, where three ethnic armed groups came together to form a coalition to target the military regime. So they have been able to capture significant territory, which you can see in the map over here. The military junta has lost territorial control in most of the areas, especially the critical border areas. Towards the China border, which is very crucial, ethnic armed groups in the Shan region have captured all the key centers and the border trade points. Towards the Indian border as well, ethnic armed groups from Rohingyas to the Chin community have captured most of the territory, which is a significant loss for the military regime. So military today holds control over very few areas in Myanmar, and this gives rise to the possibility that we might see a complete collapse of the military regime itself. So currently the situation is persisting. This situation is affecting every country in the region, including India, China, and all the Southeast Asian countries as well. And I hope you know that Myanmar is already part of a region called as the Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle is a hub of illegal, criminal, illicit activities. It covers countries like Myanmar and as well as Laos, Thailand, and of late even Cambodia. These countries are part of the Golden Triangle, which has become a major hub of illegal activities, from drug trafficking to arms trafficking to human trafficking and even cyber crimes and online frauds. So the security threats present over here could easily spill over into our northeast region across the border, because we have always seen that northeast insurgents, they've always found Myanmar as a safe haven. From 1960s, several northeast insurgent groups have found shelter in Myanmar. Either some ethnic groups have supported few northeast insurgents like Nagas, Mizos, and the Kukis, etc. And there has also been external state involvement from China to Pakistan, which have been hostile to India. They have often used Myanmar as a base to target India by supporting these anti-India insurgent forces. So there is indeed a credible threat for India, and that is why India gives such big priority to its relations with Myanmar. Now, throughout this period, India has been very, very pragmatic with Myanmar. Even though Myanmar was under military rule from 1960s, even though it oppressed the pro-democracy movement in the 80s and crushed human rights, and even though Western countries had targeted the country with sanctions, India was one of the few countries in the world which still maintained good relations with Myanmar. Especially since China had very good ties with the military regime, it became a necessity, a pragmatic necessity for India to counter Chinese influence and maintain ties with the military regime without criticizing its actions inside the country, without interfering in the internal situation of Myanmar. So India bypassed the Western sanctions. We ignored the Western economic sanctions. We even gave economic and military support to the military regime, which was violating democratic and human rights in the country. This was a practical necessity for India because China was actively involved in sponsoring Northeast insurgency, in enabling security threats for India across the India-Myanmar border. So to stabilize the Northeast region and to safeguard our strategic interests, India adopted a very realistic approach. This was a classic example of realpolitik, where India was driven by the cold-hearted calculations of strategic interests. We ignored the ideals, values, and principles, and rather we were driven by our core national interests, which was indeed the right approach at that point. So we have historically maintained very good ties with the military regime. Even today, India has good relations with the military leaders, We have made big investments in the country. We have major projects going on in Myanmar. But however, the situation might be changing drastically. It's very important for us to read the situation correctly because we can't afford mistakes like we did in Bangladesh. The ground situation in Myanmar is that there is a possibility the military regime might collapse. There is a possibility ethnic armed groups might take over or pro-democracy forces might take over. So if we are still working just with the military regime and not engaging with the other faction, right? Tomorrow, if they come to power, India's interest could be compromised. Tomorrow, let's say ethnic armed groups, they split the country into different parts. Or let's say pro-democracy forces manage to topple the regime and form a new government. Then in the future, why would that government favor India, support India and protect Indian interests? Because they would have seen that India was standing with the military regime when it was committing atrocities against them. So this is the difficult challenge for India. That is why we need to read the situation, anticipate what might happen, and ensure that we engage with all the stakeholders. So within India's strategic establishment, there is a rethink of India's Myanmar policy. According to reports, India is considering to open dialogue with the ethnic armed groups and the pro-democracy forces as well, right? Because see, for example, if you look at Bangladesh or Maldives or Nepal, we have often relied on one leader or one party to protect our interests. And when that government falls, and when there is a new government and a new leader, they often take an anti-India position, leading to a compromise on Indian interests. So in that regard, the blame largely lies on India, as we didn't cultivate ties with all stakeholders, with all the parties involved. So India wouldn't like to do the same mistake in Myanmar. So there is a possible rethinking happening in the strategic establishment of India to open ties and engage with other stakeholders as well. Now, how do we know this? We know this because at the ASEAN summit, this was very evident. India, which was also a participant, it was encouraging the ASEAN members and Myanmar to open the dialogue with all the stakeholders, which obviously includes the pro-democracy forces and maybe even the ethnic armed organizations. See, in this regard, you should know what ASEAN has been doing to stabilize the situation in Myanmar. Because obviously, Myanmar is a member of this important regional group, and no regional group can tolerate such level of instability which is affecting the entire region. So back in 2021, when the crisis broke out, ASEAN tried to step into the situation and it suggested a 5-point consensus. See, ASEAN countries, they have a charter. They have their own constitution. And according to the ASEAN charter, they are not supposed to interfere with the internal matters of another country, of another member. So basically, ASEAN will not interfere with the internal situation in Thailand or Philippines or Malaysia, and similarly in Myanmar as well. But ASEAN broke that non-interference policy because the situation in Myanmar was escalating to dangerous levels. So within the ASEAN charter, the members are obligated to maintain rule of law and governance. In order to be a member of ASEAN, a country should maintain rule of law and provide good governance, which was not the case in Myanmar, given that it had descended into a civil war, given that the military had created this situation in the first place by carrying out the coup. So ASEAN decided to step in and it suggested a 5-point plan, a 5-point consensus to bring the violence to an end through a ceasefire. ASEAN was urging the military regime to halt its military operations and convince the rebels and pro-democracy forces to end the rebellion and start a dialogue, an inclusive dialogue of all the political stakeholders while providing humanitarian assistance to the affected population. But this consensus was not implemented by Myanmar. Myanmar's military regime rejected this 5-point consensus and never implemented the 5-point consensus. So as a result, friction had come up between ASEAN and Myanmar. Myanmar had been isolated as well. And in fact, ASEAN had even stopped inviting Myanmar's officials for important meetings of the ASEAN. So the country was being cornered and isolated by the ASEAN members, since Myanmar wasn't following the 5-point consensus. But during this year's ASEAN summit, there was a big change. Myanmar has sent a senior official to Laos to participate in this year's ASEAN summit, and ASEAN leaders also engaged with the representative from Myanmar. That shows that Myanmar is also willing to reach out to ASEAN to seek any help if required. It also shows that ASEAN countries are also willing to have a dialogue. So this is an opportunity where India can also work with. We can use our influence, our leverage with all these members of ASEAN and try to bring them to a common point so we can engage with all the stakeholders in Myanmar. But this is where there is a major divide within the ASEAN group. Within the ASEAN group, which consists of 10 Southeast Asian countries, some countries are strongly divided on how to deal with Myanmar. If you look at Indonesia, Malaysia and Philippines, they are pushing for action against Myanmar's military. They are pushing for penalties and sanctions against Myanmar's military for perpetuating the crisis, for violating human rights. But the neighbors of Myanmar like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, they don't agree with that. They believe that ASEAN should engage with Myanmar, work with Myanmar. So India can possibly play a positive role to bridge the differences, the divide within the ASEAN group. Thailand has suggested a proposal to engage in informal talks, not just with the military regime, but also with the rebel groups and the pro-democracy forces. So India can give a push to this initiative, convince other ASEAN countries through its Act East policy, so that even India can be part of these talks with ASEAN to engage in a dialogue with all the stakeholders in Myanmar. If we have to prevent a complete collapse of the military regime and the state of Myanmar, if we have to prevent complete chaos in the region, which might affect every neighboring country, we need to work together. We need to engage with the national unity government that represents the pro-democracy forces. We may have to informally engage even with the ethnic armed organizations while we talk to the military regime parallelly. So it appears that it is inevitable for the military regime to step down. So to decide the future state, the future of the government in Myanmar, I think India, along with Southeast Asian countries, can play a very big positive role, and India-ASEAN relations can be helpful in this regard. Now, some of you might ask, why should we be so concerned, worried about what's happening in Myanmar? The reason why Myanmar is critical is because it is central to our Act East policy. And Act East policy is central to our Indo-Pacific policy. If India wants to be a major power in the Indo-Pacific, we want the Act East policy to succeed. If we have to counter China in the Indo-Pacific, we want Act East to succeed. And Southeast Asia is critical for this, as it lies at the very center, at the very heart of the Indo-Pacific. And don't forget, Myanmar is a land bridge for India, quite literally. Geographically speaking, Myanmar is like a bridge connecting India with Southeast Asia. It directly links Northeastern markets with Southeast Asian markets. So there is a great opportunity here to link Southeast Asian and Northeast Indian markets and drive investments into Northeast India, to develop Northeast region of India, which has remained underdeveloped. This could also help India to tackle insurgency and organized crime, which flows over from across the Myanmar border. We have big investments in Myanmar. For example, we have the Kaladan multimodal transit transport corridor project. India is building a strategic port. We have recently started the operations of this strategic port as well. Now, can you find out which port am I referring to under Kaladan project? And can you identify the route, the alignment of Kaladan project, and mention that in the comments? We also have the trilateral highway, India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway, which is an ongoing project, and we hope to expand this to connect with Vietnam as well. India would also like to have a parallel railway line linking India with Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and then Vietnam. These are grand proposals of India under Act East, Look East, Act East initiative. These are ongoing projects nearing completion, but they have taken a hit because of the security situation in the country. If we are able to bring stability back, we can focus on these connectivity projects, trade initiatives, and ensure Myanmar is a link that connects India with Southeast Asia and thus bring benefits for both sides. So that is why it is imperative, as of now, to engage with all the stakeholders in Myanmar. We share a 1,643 kilometer land border with this country, a very sensitive border. From many decades since independence, we have been dealing with security problems along this border. So we can't allow this to continue and persist. Because see, the India-Myanmar border, which is guarded by Assam Rifles, has always been very porous because of its unique terrain. It's a very complex geography, complex topography present over here. You have hilly mountainous region, dense forested areas as well, and underdeveloped, underconnected areas. So this has been a challenge with regard to border security. So from 6 to 7 decades, we have seen cross-border infiltration, which has affected the security situation in Northeast India. Be it the infiltration of organized criminal smugglers who are bringing drugs and arms and carrying out human trafficking, or be it the cross-border movement of insurgents and terrorists. This has been a major security challenge for India. In fact, the recent violence in Manipur, the ethnic clashes in Manipur, has been connected with the movement of refugees from Myanmar to Manipur by the government of India. The Ministry of Home Affairs saw a direct link between the crisis in Myanmar and the refugee flow into Manipur and Mizoram, and connected this with the latest ethnic clashes which has been affecting Manipur over the last year. The clashes between Meiteis and the Kukis has been partially linked and blamed on the Zomi refugees who have come in from Myanmar to Manipur. Though it is rejected by the state governments and the local ethnic groups, the center insists that the problems in Manipur is related to the refugee flow from Myanmar. That is why India decided to suspend the free movement regime. India-Myanmar had a free movement regime in place. Under this arrangement, border villages located within 16 kilometers from the border, they could enjoy visa-free travel access. It benefited border trade. It helped the local communities to connect on other side of the border to maintain their familial, cultural relations. So for many years under free movement regime, those villages present within 16 kilometers of the border on both sides, they would enjoy visa-free access. But now India has suspended this regime, given the security threats emerging from Myanmar, and Home Ministry has even ordered the fencing of this entire stretch of the border. So we are taking up hard physical security measures to blockade this border. So this could hurt border trade and it could hurt cultural ties, especially for the local ethnic tribes and communities. So if we have to stabilize the situation, India has to work with not just the military regime in Myanmar, but we should also work with ASEAN countries and all the other stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? One, of course, is the military junta. The other would be the National Unity Government and the People's Defense Forces, which represents the pro-democracy faction, and the ethnic armed organizations. We have to engage with all of them, and India-ASEAN can honestly work together to bring stability back into Myanmar. So that is what we take away from this important article. So please take up this practice question. The time has come for India and ASEAN to adopt a more pragmatic approach towards resolving the civil war in Myanmar through inclusive engagement with all the stakeholders. Elucidate. So now we head towards the prelim section and we can quickly cover the small topics. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, any doubts on these two topics, please let me know. Mumtaz says junta is pronounced as junta. Yeah, absolutely. That's a Spanish word, but there's no harm in saying military junta as well. That is the English pronunciation. Very good. Many students have correctly mentioned the name of the port. It is the Sitwe port, which is part of the Kaladan project. Any specific questions? Can we look at other doubts and questions as well? Okay, so let's proceed and I will take a look at your doubts at the end of the session again. So we have this article on page 12 related to international relations and defense. It refers to a jet engine which India is procuring from General Electric or GE, which is a US based defense manufacturer. So GE, which is a multinational conglomerate, it has a specific focus on aerospace and defense as well. So with this American aerospace and defense manufacturer, India has struck two separate deals for jet engines. One is for the F404 jet engines and another recent deal for F414 jet engines. These jet engines are being procured by India's HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, to power the LCA Tejas fighter jet. As you know, light combat aircraft, the Tejas fighter jet, is an indigenously designed and developed fighter jet. But HAL and the Aeronautical Development Agency, which designed and developed Tejas, they have faced multiple setbacks, many failures, because this is a fighter jet which is under development for more than 40 years. And still we are struggling, right? Even though Indian Air Force has started inducting some of them, there are still many challenges, and the biggest challenge is the engine which could power the fighter jet. The Kaveri engine, which was supposed to be an indigenous engine program, failed. So HAL has been forced to look for foreign suppliers. And GE of United States has been the chosen supplier to provide the crucial jet engines to power the HAL Tejas. So in 2021, Defense Ministry had approved the procurement of F404 jet engines, as the Defense Ministry had raised a new contract for procuring the latest version of LCA Tejas. So HAL had signed a contract and GE was supposed to deliver the F404 engines by 2024. But GE has been facing a substantial delay. There is a supply chain setback. There is a supply chain disruption which GE has not been able to overcome. It's not been able to procure the components, the raw materials to build and supply those engines to India. So as a result, there has been a substantial delay, and hence HAL has decided to invoke the penalty provisions of the contract. See, in any such high value defense contract, there will be penalty provisions if you don't abide by the terms of the contract. Right? For both parties, this applies for both parties. If the buyer doesn't make timely payments, if the seller doesn't deliver the agreed goods as per the contract, then both the buyer and seller can be penalized as per the terms of the contract. So in this case, it is GE which has failed to deliver on time. So HAL has already invoked the penal provisions, which means a penalty will pile up on General Electric. So now GE has committed that by early next year, it will start delivering a few F404 engines, which can power the new variant of LCA Tejas, which is being inducted into the Indian Air Force. Now, what is the other deal that we signed recently? This was last year in 2023, when PM Modi visited United States last year. Another historic deal was signed between HAL and General Electric to supply the more advanced F414 engines, which is again for the Tejas program itself. Because the Indian Air Force and even Indian Navy are looking to scale up the procurement of Tejas to plug the gaps that exist with the fighter jet squadrons. So these jet engines from GE will be critical for developing LCA Tejas in India and inducting them into the armed forces. So this development highlights a new agreement we have signed, the SOSA agreement. The SOSA agreement stands for Security of Supply Agreement. During the recent visit of the PM to United States, just last month in September 2024, when PM Modi visited US for the Quad Summit and held a bilateral dialogue with US President Biden, India signed another important defense military related agreement called SOSA, the Security of Supply Agreement. This binds India and US to help each other when they face supply chain disruptions, especially in critical industries like defense, to meet the national security needs of each other. If one country is facing a supply chain constraint, they have to help the other country to ensure that their defense and security interests are protected. This is a commitment India-US have made, which comes into action, which comes into picture, given that GE was not able to supply the jet engines because of supply chain disruption. So in the future, US would expect India to solve the supply chain problems if US manufacturers are facing those delays, and vice versa. If India faces supply chain disruptions, we would expect US government and US companies to ease those disruptions to protect India's national security interests. So the Security of Supply Agreement is a very important agreement that India has signed with the US. In fact, many other countries have signed the same agreement with the United States. I think around 18 countries, which are close American allies, right? They've all signed the Security of Supply Agreement with US, and India is one of them. This also highlights the close defense relations that we have with United States. Now coming to another defense related article on page 12, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has flagged off the Sagarmala Parikrama. What is Sagarmala Parikrama? It is an autonomous surface vessel, basically an autonomous ship or autonomous boat developed by an Indian startup, which has been flagged off from Mumbai to Thoothukudi. So basically from west coast to east coast, this autonomous boat will make an autonomous journey, unmanned journey. So this is an outcome of the involvement of defense startups in working with armed forces of India to develop indigenous defense technologies, especially critical emerging technologies. So this autonomous vessel, which is a surface vessel, will obviously be powered by AI. It will be autonomously maneuvered from Mumbai to Thoothukudi. So this vessel is named as Sagarmala Parikrama. So there can be a possible prelims question. Now this defense equipment has been developed as part of the INDEX scheme or IDEX scheme, Innovations for Defense Excellence scheme, launched by the Defense Ministry in 2018. The IDEX or INDEX, Innovations for Defense Excellence. Under the scheme, the Defense Ministry and Armed Forces, they are giving challenges to India's private industry. They are giving technological challenges, especially in AI, machine learning, and other critical emerging technologies. So they are encouraging the private industry and the defense startups to come out with solutions for these challenges presented by the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The defense forces would be looking for certain critical emerging technologies. So they present the challenge to the tech companies and the private defense startups, and they come out with innovations and solutions which can solve this problem, which can bring out indigenous defense technology in India. So IDEX scheme has been very successful. Under this, various challenges are run by the Defense Ministry, such as Defense India Startup Challenge or ADITI Challenge, acing development of innovative technologies with IDEX. So Sagarmala Parikrama has been developed under ADITI 3.0, which is under the IDEX scheme itself. So this is what you need to note. So these initiatives of the Defense Ministry will help in promoting defense indigenization to make India Atmanirbhar with regard to defense technology. Coming to the next article on page 14, the article refers to NCB, Narcotics Control Bureau, which has busted a meth lab with Delhi police. So this is part of the efforts of NCB to tackle the menace of drugs, drug production, drug trafficking, which is not just a social evil as our youth get addicted to it. It is also a major economic and security threat, because such organized crime will often be linked with organized criminal cartels which are transnational in their operations. They'll also be connected with money laundering networks and terror outfits or terror financing channels. So this cartel which has been broken did involve members of the Mexican drug cartel. The Canola Mexican drug cartel has been possibly linked with this drug facility which was located right in the heart of the national capital. So we should learn what is NCB. There can be a prelims question, right? For example, if you look at this year's prelims paper, there have been questions from internal security as well. So there can be a possible question on Narcotics Control Bureau. The NCB, which functions under the Home Ministry, it is both an intelligence agency and a law enforcement agency. Its mandate is mainly to tackle drug production, drug trafficking, right? It's the primary anti-drug agency of India. It was established in 1986 through the NDPS Act. India enacted the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act in 1985 to fulfill our international obligations under few international conventions. India is a signatory to the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. We have also signed and ratified the Convention on Psychotropic Substances, the UN Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. So India has major commitments, international obligations under these three conventions against drugs. So to fulfill those commitments, we brought out the NDPS Act in 1985, and later we even brought out the Prevention of Illicit Trafficking in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1988. So through NDPS Act, the NCB was established as the Central Law Enforcement and Intelligence Agency to counter drug drug production, drug trafficking, and drug peddling. So NCB primarily consists of officers from IRS and IPS who occupy the leadership positions, and it plays a pivotal role with other agencies like Enforcement Directorate, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, NIA, and it coordinates with all these law enforcement agencies to tackle the menace of drug trafficking and deals with the threats emerging from the menace of drugs. Coming to the last article for today, on the supplement page, where you have the science section, there is an article related to environment, ecology, and geography. The Hindu carries this spectacular image from the East Pacific Rise, which is a major mid-oceanic ridge in the Pacific. This picture was captured at a depth of 2,500 meters, 2.5 kilometers below the surface on the seabed. Now, why is this image so important? The image is extremely important because generally our scientific understanding was at such depths, we presume that there won't be any life forms which will flourish because of the harsh conditions. There's almost no sunlight. It's a zone of complete darkness. And given the extreme pressure and other extreme conditions, the general assumption was life cannot be found at such depths. But regular exploration research has always surprised us, as we have come across many different species which have adapted to the depth conditions present in these oceans. So this image captures some of the largest worms ever seen. This image has captured the tube worms that you can see over here. See, this is an eel. Next to these eels, these are bottom-dwelling eels which manage to survive at these extraordinary depths. They have been spotted near these tube worms, which is again a clear display of the beauty of nature as to how life can adapt to even extreme conditions. So that is why it's a very important discovery. But the point that is more relevant for our exams would be the East Pacific Rise, which has been mentioned in this picture. The East Pacific Rise is this mid-oceanic ridge running from North America towards the Antarctica. Is that clear? It's essentially a plate boundary. It's a divergent plate boundary. There are multiple tectonic plates that are diverging over here. You have your North American plate, the Cocos, Nazca plate, and the Antarctic plate. They form a divergent zone in the central South Pacific region. It runs all the way from Mexico, from North America towards Antarctica. This is the East Pacific Rise. So this is where this image was taken at a place called Taika Vent. At a place called Taika Vent in the East Pacific Ridge. That is where the tube worms were captured on camera. So there can be a possible prelims question based on this. So please make a note of it. So with this, I complete my discussion for today. I hope you guys have liked and understood all the topics. Now, please let me know if you have any questions quickly. And after that, we can end the session for today. Student is asking, sir, please take whole newspaper analysis, not just 4-5 articles. See, our attempt is always to cover all the important articles. Today, you don't have any other important article. These are the only 6 articles which are relevant. But some days we even cover 10 to 14 articles. Right? So then please don't complain that session is getting extended. So what we are trying to do is to do the best possible to ensure that we cover the entire newspaper. If there are 10, 12 articles, we'll cover all of them, even if it takes extra time. Right? And if there are just few articles, we'll cover only that, what is necessary. Deepika says, recent protectionist policies like Karnataka's bill reserving jobs for locals, it seems against migration, leading to more disparities. How can we tackle this type of issue? You're absolutely right. One of the bills proposed in Karnataka to provide reservation for locals is a result of the North-South debate. And there are valid arguments on both sides. Right? So to address that, you need to bridge the differences that are present, be it the social, economic difference, and tackle the developmental issues in the northern states as well. Right? So there are multiple issues to be tackled over there. Yashodharan says mid-oceanic ridges are prone to natural disasters. Yes, you're absolutely right. Mid-oceanic ridges, right? They are very active seismic zones. They're highly prone to underwater earthquakes and landslides and even volcanic eruptions. So it is quite shocking and surprising to find such life to be thriving at those depths. That's why it's very important. Okay. So these were some of the questions. On this note, I would like to end the session for today. So before I end, I wish everyone a very happy Diwali. Celebrate the festival and may light guide your path towards cracking your IAS dream. So we'll catch up tomorrow again. The CNA will not stop despite the festival. We'll catch up again tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.